5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Puck short.
Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new episode of the One Puck Short podcast, episode 97, and my guest this week is a writer for The Athletic covering the Pittsburgh Penguins. Please welcome to the show, Jesse Marshall. Jesse, hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, Rob. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm brilliant. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, you cover the Penguins for The Athletic, third in the Metro right now. I guess we should really start with the trade, as we'll call it, which took place on Friday. Nick Bjugstad and Jared McCann joining the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Derek Brassard, Riley Sheehan, and a couple of picks went to the Panthers as well. I mean, what do you make of that trade from the Penguins' point of view?
Well, both Brassard and Shane were just putting up some pretty underwhelming performances. And the Brassard trade, overall, he gets dealt again less than a year than when he'd arrived here in the first place, which I think is just a testament to it not working.
Yeah.
Mike Sullivan, and Mike Sullivan actually went out of his way to speak to Derek Brassard before he left to reinforce what a good player he thought Derek Brassard was. Which I thought was like a really nice thing.
Yeah,
and I think all parties could kind of acknowledge, hey, like we tried everything, and for whatever reason, it never came together. So what you get back is two players that are Nick Bjugstad, not off to the greatest start this season, but he's kind of like Tanner Pearson in that sense, where Pearson was just kind of in a massive slump with the Kings. He comes to Pittsburgh. Boom, he breaks right out of it. You kind of hope Bjugstad does the same thing. But overall, if you look at him from a 3-year perspective, he's great. I mean, percentile-wise, in the top third of the National Hockey League in just about every metric you could drum up. And Jared McCann this year, goal scoring rate is better than half the league at even strength. So two guys, McCann's stock way up right now. They got Bjugstad, I think, at a time where they're hoping he can kind of flip the switch. And I think over the course of the last two games, considering neither one of them have had a formal practice yet, they've done their part, and I think they've showcased a little bit of what they can bring, which is that energy and that puck pursuit and ability to keep it alive down low.
Yeah, as you mentioned, they haven't had the chance to practice with the team yet. They both made their debut Friday against the Ottawa Senators in Pittsburgh. They interviewed Jacques Martin, I saw on the broadcast, and he said, they didn't even have time to go over the Penguins' sort of scheduled plays and things like that with McCann and Bjugstad before they hit the ice. They literally jumped on during the anthems and away they went. And played again, obviously, last night in Toronto. Bjugstad centering the second line in Evgeny Malkin's absence. Where do you think that the two players, they shake out when guys like Malkin are back in? There was talk of maybe Bjugstad playing on the wing a little bit again. Does that happen? Then McCann slots in as the third line centre. How do you think the Penguins line up when they're at full strength now?
Well, I do think that'll end up being the case, because I don't think that Teddy Blueger is going to go back to the American Hockey League. I think he's just the run he's gotten off to, the start he's gotten off to, showcasing what he can do. They've handled his development in a way that I think they were ready for this time. The getting was good, so to speak, and I think that Bjugstad spent most of the year on the wing for Florida this year. He can play both, obviously, as he's filled in at center already. But McCann can play the wing as well. So one of the things that Sullivan talked about was, I can kind of put these guys wherever I want. And we haven't quite yet determined what that's going to look like when everybody's healthy. But I think it stands to reason that you might see Bjugstad play on the wing with Malkin, potentially, because in that situation now, one thing that Sullivan has really said a lot is, we want him to keep the play alive in the offensive zone more, and that's what Nick Bjugstad does. So he can really aid, I think, Evgeny Malkin in that sense, and help him to be playing more offense than defense.
The other interesting thing I found was that both Bjugstad and McCann are under contract beyond this season. They've got at least one more year. In Bjugstad's case, he's got 2 more years. They're both first-round picks. Bjugstad, 19th overall in 2010. McCann, 24th overall in 2014. He was obviously a Canucks pick, originally traded to the Panthers in exchange for Erik Gudbranson in 2016. They've both got good experience, as you said. Bjugstad's done some good things in Florida. Maybe hasn't worked out quite as well this year as they had hoped, but he's got 192 points in 396 career games now.
Yeah.
And McCann's got decent returns too as a depth forward, but he's 22. I mean, to me, these moves spoke of a team which, as they have done with Crosby, Malkin, Letang, wants to keep a certain group together because they think that's their best chance to win. Is that a fair assessment?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And think about the shift in philosophy too, because years ago, their move at this time of the year was always to swing for the fences and to bring in the biggest free agent that they could with the shortest amount of time of control to try to put them over the hump. And I think now they're kind of letting the core take the forefront and being a little bit more particular about the complementary pieces. That's what this move is. It's complementary pieces with youth and control financially. These are players that are restricted free agency here. So you have the ability to kind of go to arbitration if necessary and keep the overall cost down as the cap goes up. And the less money you can pay those complementary players, the better off you are. And I think that Bjugstad's on a very friendly deal for the kind of point production he can give you. A goal production, really, more specifically. He's coming off a 24-goal season. And McCann, you're getting for peanuts. So it gives the Penguins still a little bit of an opportunity to continue to tinker, if they want to adjust here or there in the complementary piece side. And I don't know that another move's necessarily on the radar, but I wouldn't rule it out given the financial flexibility that they have.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the numbers there. Bjugstad, $4.1 million per season until 2021, as we said, and McCann, $1.25 million until 2020, and that's, like you said, that's peanuts really for a guy of his ability. I guess you kind of have touched on the next question a little bit there. We've seen, obviously, the trade this week. We mentioned Tanner Pearson earlier. Do the Penguins look elsewhere? Is there an obvious gap that they may need to fill? And on that note, where does Justin Schultz return to the ice factor into this? Because he's skating with the team again. He's been out since October, but getting a defenseman of that caliber back now, surely that's almost as good as making a trade for a top-tier defenseman in itself.
It is, yeah, and especially considering the success I think that he had with Olli Mata last year. And hope, I think the hope is that they can rekindle that together. Olli Mata had his best year of his career last season with Justin Schultz, playing the majority of the year with him. So, I think that's the direction you go, but then the question becomes, do you just keep – does that mean Juuso Riikola just comes out and you keep Marcus Pettersson and Jack Johnson together? I would assume that'd probably be the case. But Jamie Oleksiak was sort of the sacrifice they made here to keep things manageable when Schultz returns. And the doctors have given him the thumbs up, I think. So now it's just a matter of getting acclimated, and once that happens, to your point, that's going to be their biggest acquisition right there. Will be him coming off the IR.
What's your take on the Penguins season so far? Because, as we mentioned, they're third in the Metropolitan Division right now. They're level on points with Washington, a couple of points behind the Islanders at the top, and a little bit of cushion on Columbus just behind there. I mean, it seems that it's been a little bit up and down for the Penguins. They've been a little bit streaky. Is that a fair assessment to make of their year so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they went on an initial trip in Western Canada way back at the start. And just went crazy. That was when Sidney Crosby caught fire and was going nuts on his backhand. And then when they came back from that, they sort of rested on their laurels a little bit and just fell into a lot of bad habits. And then next thing you know, they go on that run, starting around early mid-December after they blow one completely to the Flyers. They go on a run and really up to the break, were one of the better teams in the league, were the best team in the league at times. Mm-hmm. And then sort of that all-star break came around and the spottiness kind of came back. I think what you hear from Mike Sullivan is the engagement level is what he talks about a lot. And knowing like, hey, look, this is a veteran team. they know what time of year it is, but that's no excuse. And you look, Washington struggled. Columbus has been, really rough in the last week. There's opportunity to kind of, push everybody aside and march up the ladder. And there's been times where they've kind of, not taken those opportunities for granted. Like for example, New Jersey Monday night, just a abysmal performance. They appear all too often, and I think Mike Sullivan's sort of tasked with trying to eliminate those performances and bring that consistency into the fold as things kind of get down to the nitty gritty of it here.
I mean, is it maybe a case of, because they've had the postseason success, they've won 2 of the last 3 Stanley Cups, that there is that slight, I don't want to call it malaise, that may be the wrong word, but that slight, I don't know another way to put it, I'm sorry, but they're kind of within themselves, within the regular
season. I think
a
monotony.
Yeah,
I think
maybe.
Monotony is the word. Yeah, absolutely. And because the system is the system, and it's something that takes a lot of energy. Mike Sullivan's style of play demands that you exert yourself physically in multiple areas of the ice. And when you don't, and you run that system, you just get picked apart. And that's been, I think, the theme more often than not, is when the engagement level's not there and they're not skating as hard, they're not forechecking as hard, maybe they're a little bit lazy defensively, taking the night off here and there. That's where you kind of get just destroyed, because now the other team, you're reactive instead of proactive, and it destroys. It's not a system you can run like that. So I think Mike Sullivan's frustration is that when they execute it, they do what they did against Tampa Bay, just blow them out of the water. And Toronto last night, you get 40 minutes of it, and that's not good enough. So putting the whole piece together and keeping the run like the one they had in December alive, that's the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Maple Leafs game. Obviously, they were 2-0 up in that game as well, and ended up losing. Where does goaltending play into the Penguins now? Because earlier in the year, Matt Murray had some injury problems. He was coming off some injury problems from last year as well. Didn't play so well. Seems to have got better as the year has gone on. But Casey DeSmith's had a pretty strong year, as you'd say, still backup, though he's played slightly more games than Murray. Where do DeSmith and Murray feature now? And is Murray still the guy? It just happens that he's had those injury problems and missed some time.
I think he's 100% the guy, and I think that he's really taken the net over since he's come back from injury. One of the better goaltenders in the league from his return to present day. Skyrocketed up as far as save percentage. I think in relation to where the rest of the league was, he was in another stratosphere, in another universe when he came back from injury. Now he's kind of come back down to earth a little bit, but I've always said, Rob, look, the Penguins just need to get average goaltending. That's all they need. The style of hockey they play, the way they play, if you can just be average, that's good enough. I think he's proven that he can do that, and I think the returns since he's come back have been even a little bit higher than that. And Casey DeSmith, I think, ironically enough, with less playing time, is the one that's taken the biggest hit. And I think taking him out of the rotation of being the everyday guy has cooled him off a little bit. So that may mean we see more Matt Murray than usual. But Murray always seems to play his best when he's got somebody behind him and somebody competitive back there. So Casey DeSmith, his performance, I think, plays a role in what you get out of Matt Murray in some ways. Yeah,
and that would make sense dating back to when Murray kind of broke into the NHL, because obviously it was the Murray and Fleury partnership. And then obviously Marc-Andre Fleury was claimed by Vegas, and maybe it wasn't as strong last year for Matt Murray, but again, there's always that asterisk and that caveat that he did have some injury trouble and concussion involved in there as well. Do you see Murray and DeSmith, because obviously DeSmith has signed a sort of a mid-range extension at a very reasonable rate. He's now signed through to 2022. It'll be $1.25 million per season from next year, on a very reasonable $675,000.
Yeah.
Murray is an RFA in 2020. Is it going to be the case that they're just going to run with these guys for as long as they can in the future, do you think?
I think so, especially because of how cost-effective Casey DeSmith's deal is. I mean, compare that to the contract that the Edmonton Oilers gave to Koskinen. Yeah, it was brutal, right? It's compare the two, and it's like, wow, how did this happen? So I think that's what they're going to do. I think it makes Tristan Jarry maybe a little bit expendable I don't know that that's something we'll see happen now. It strikes me as more of a summer deal potential type situation if they want to accrue more picks, given what they had to sacrifice for Bjugstad and McCann. So, but yeah, I mean, I think they're set. I think this is a good situation that they have, and assuming that Casey DeSmith's is not a flash in the pan, I think they've done well to get while the getting is good.
I mean, his Yari's stock just kind of dropped in Pittsburgh, because at one point he was very well thought of. He was a guy who was projected to maybe be an NHL starter, even if you just call it sort of a mid-range starter, but he was at least well thought of, shall we say. Whereas now, as we said, DeSmith's kind of stepped into that role as the number 2. Murray is generally seen as the starter, and no reason to change that given the way he's played lately. So, as you said, it kind of leaves Tristan Jarry as the odd man out. And
it kind of just plateaued for him. I think he got up to a certain point, he peaked, and then it never got any better. I think that's what the frustration sort of was. And don't get me wrong, Rob, he's still a good goaltender in the AHL, but good. Not where you would assume he would be given his level of experience. So I think that's the frustration. But there are a lot of teams who are just destitute in their goaltending pipelines that'll take a rehabilitation project, at least that I think would be seen as, from the Penguins, and perhaps sacrifice an asset for it. And that's, there's a lot of mismanagement out there, we'll say, when it comes to goalies. So I think that there's still a potential that they can recoup something for him, and potentially bait someone into coming into the picture based on potential alone.
Something that I noticed from the broadcast of yesterday's Toronto-Pittsburgh game, they brought up some stats about Sidney Crosby, the shot ratio and the goal differential, specifically numbers between people who've played with Crosby and obviously not. One thing that he's rarely spoken of in the conversation about is the Selke. Obviously, he's a perennial Hart candidate, perennial Art Ross candidate, but is this something that's maybe overlooked in Crosby's game, that the strength he has as a two-way player, and should he be considered more closely for the Selke at some point?
I think for sure. I think that playing him more on the penalty kill will boost his claim to a trophy like that. And that's, we saw it last night. Crosby on the penalty kill against Toronto, they're down a goal, and he had that ridiculous behind-the-back opportunity that he kind of one-motioned it. Those opportunities, I think, will help his case. But Crosby's got also the bane of scoring too much. And that's a problem with the Selke trophy, because you got to remember, I think the Selke and the Norris are both oftentimes reputation-based awards. That are some, they are, and they're sometimes predetermined. This guy just quote unquote deserves one. So Crosby, again, being the offensive highlight reel that he is, his, I think, defensive ability gets overlooked. But honestly, for me, Rob, playing defense in the offensive zone is still playing defense.
Right. Yeah.
So so no matter what, he's still neutralizing the best players in the league. So I do think he deserves a little bit more recognition for that.
Yeah, and as you said, I guess the mitigating factor is that he scores, and he scores a lot, and he scores every year, and he's such a focal point. Even when the Penguins are fully healthy, he's still the guy you think of most when you talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins offense. And, that does, rightly or wrongly, seem to maybe colour things. People think, well, if he's going to score all those points, they don't need to be as good at the back end. It's like, well, you still need to, in a very competitive league, get into the playoffs, win championships, and it does seem to be an area of his game which, as much as we praise Sidney Crosby, justifiably so, just seems to fly under the radar a lot of the time.
I think there's just a lot of what he does that you become accustomed to, and you start to take it for granted a little bit. His ability to play the puck off of his skate and onto the blade of his stick, the things that he could do on his backhand. Yeah, there's a little subtlety, and I think back to I believe it was Tampa Bay the other night, where he spun off of his backhand and Ottawa. It was Ottawa. He spun off of his backhand in the corner and threw one, across the slot to Jake Gensel, who was wide open on the other side. Yeah. And all the Senators players, all 5 of them, were staring at Sidney Crosby. And it's just, his ability to take a game over for that momentary, just, 2 or 3 strides, draw the attention to himself and benefit someone else. You're going to see. I think that's the version of him we're going to get more as he gets older. That's future Sidney Crosby, is that laser precision passing and being 2-3 steps ahead of everyone. But we see it so much that it becomes, I guess, expected. So, night after night, if you really hone in on him and pay attention, there's always something he's doing, whether it be defensively or his stick work here or there, or his ability to, change the tempo of the game, that kind of just falls by the wayside, unfortunately, because we're so used to seeing it. But every night, it's, make no mistake about it, he always does something that you end up writing about the next day.
Yeah. Do you think he's maybe, I use popularized as a loose term, or maybe it is the right term? Do you think he's popularized the backhand again? Because it wasn't something you talked about widely when I was a kid. You didn't hear people talk about it hugely, and then he comes into the league, and as you said, that play against Ottawa was phenomenal, just to pick out Gensel like that. But it's one of a number of plays you could pick out over his career that he's made off his backhand and goals he scored. And do you think he's changed the way that we look at the use of the backhand, and we can see more young players coming through trying to emulate that over time?
Well, I think so, because the players who were really good at it before him, and I would say Pavel Datsyuk and Peter Forsberg would be the two that I would lean most heavily on. Maybe Adam Oates I would throw in there. But they were all not one-dimensional, but Datsyuk was ridiculous scoring on his backhand. You didn't see him set people up off of it as much. You got a little bit of both out of Forsberg, but it wasn't the primary weapon for him. Adam Oates didn't score a lot on his backhand, but he could set people up that way. I think with Sidney Crosby, this is so versatile with it. There's nothing he can't do. He's a master, I think, at every aspect of it. So in that sense, I don't think we've ever seen a player at this level ever utilize the shot and the pass off the backhand the way he does. And I would highly doubt that we'll see a player in this generation use a stick and a blade alignment that he does. He's an anomaly in the sense that he's one of the only players in the league right now that's playing with a completely flat blade.
Yeah, and you think about even historically, because those sort of players become almost like folklore. Ryan Smith is the other one that kind of springs to mind, but there aren't many guys, not in the modern era, that play with a stick blade like that. Yeah,
no, you're right, and it's an outdated thing. A lot of different kinds of curves now. People want to put the curve at the toe or the heel, and you got stick lie and how far it the angle that the stick comes off the blade. But universally, all those variants have at least some kind of change in the blade at somewhere. Crosby's has kind of over time not really changed, and is sort of this quote unquote outdated modality of shooting that works perfectly for him. And I think that that'll always be a part sort of his legacy.
We talk about Crosby's legacy. Obviously, he's still got some good years left in him, I think, at 31. Kessel's 31, Malkin 32, Hornqvist 32. I mean, these are guys under contract for several more years. Is it the case that the Penguins are just going to keep going with this core for as long as they hold it, for as long as their bodies hold together and they're young enough, air quotes, to keep doing what they do and keep the Penguins a cup contender? Is that going to be the road that Jim Rutherford takes them down? Just keep going with these guys because we're successful with these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Letang, Crosby, Malkin, Kessel's the one that I think would be most apt to leave. Somebody asked me, Rob, last week if I thought that Kessel would retire a Penguin. I said unequivocally no. I just don't think he will, just for salary cap reasons. I think that they'll eventually get to a point where they move him, maybe not immediately, but towards maybe the end of his deal. But I think the Penguins will still run with this core, but the focus will shift to rebuilding what's coming behind them, and trying to get younger and more cost-friendly for when the impending sort of departure of those players comes. But I think knowing, what we know about these specific players, the shape that they're in, the way that they train, that's probably not for another 5 years. I mean, I really believe that. I think that they'll be competitive for another 5 years with the same group. And as long as they can keep the complementary pieces improving, and Jim Rutherford seems intent on doing that, I think that's the key to winning for them.
Yeah, and looking at the sort of the mid-range or mid-age or mid-range age players, I mean, Bjugstad's 26, Pearson's 26. There's value there either now for the Penguins or even down the road as possible trade pieces in the future. Jared McCann's 22, as we mentioned. Dominic Simon's 24. They've got all these guys that can stick around for multiple seasons and help contribute. Plus,
Jake Gensel is another one.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, Gensel's 24. He's got a new extension kicking in next year. So, that's the kind of... And he was the kind of guy you think of when you say, well, if they look to move Phil Kessel, you've got a goal scorer in Gensel who can kind of lift that mantle or take on that mantle maybe as the chief winger, shall we call it, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and play the role that I think a lot of people thought Daniel Sprong would play. It just didn't work out. So I think that Gensel, though, I think he's proven, Rob, that he can create statistically independent of Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
And I think anytime you find a player that gives a bump to Crosby's numbers, that's a hard thing to do. You're giving a bump to a guy that's in the 99th percentile of every statistic in the league. So Gensel can do it, though. He's done it. So I think he's good independent of what Sidney Crosby can do, and is the kind of player you could reap a benefit from years on down the line.
How important was that for Jake Gensel to sort of perform in, call it both situations, with and without Crosby? Because, I'm an Islanders fan. I've seen it over the years with John Tavares, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, well, that's great. He scored 30 goals with John Tavares. He did this with John Tavares, and so on and so on. How important was it for Jake Gensel to have that time away from Crosby to say, look, I can still contribute. I am worth this big extension that they've just invested in me?
His dad's a phenomenal collegiate coach. And I think you can see that he's the son of a coach. I think that's just the way he plays hockey. So it's huge for him to be able to prove that he can, create time and space on his own, and he can exploit it on his own where it exists. He's just versatile, and I think in the future where he'll really pay a huge dividend for the Penguins is going to be on the power play, and really stepping into a shooter's role there on the first unit, I think is the next big step for Jake Gensel, and one that I think he'll excel at as well. But he just plays the game in such a smart way that he knows how to create space and knows how to sneak into those little soft areas and convert. And that's really what you want out of a player who's going to be playing alongside a guy like a Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, and I mean, he's on pace to break the 30-goal barrier this year. He had 22 goals last year, so he's in improvement again and again. And I mean, the thing with the NHL is goals are expensive. They're always going to cost you money. So, that's got to factor in too. If they think they've got a 24-year-old who can be a perennial 30-goal scorer, you invest in that, right? Yeah,
sure. And considering, I think the fact that there's a real potential for that, Rob, how good does that deal look? I mean, they're ahead of the game. I think prices are going to continue to go up as the cap increases.
Yeah, for sure.
No matter what happens with the next CBA, ownership in the league has shown no desire to be responsible with the way they spend money in a lot of ways. Right. So
that's why we have 2 lockouts.
Sure, right, exactly right. So I think to get him, at this rate, that's just absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, for sure. Looking ahead to the postseason, I think most people would be pretty confident Pittsburgh are going to make the cut now, given where they are in the standings and the way things are shaking out. Right now, they would be slated to face the Capitals, and obviously that may change. They may win the division and get a wild card, but the big thing in the East is the Tampa Bay Lightning, always lurking on the horizon for any potential cup contender from the East. Where do you think the Penguins shaking out? Where do you think they can improve, maybe before the deadline? And what do you think their chances are of picking up another cup this year?
I think that they're in the top. I think this is going to be complicated, but follow me on this. They're at the bottom of the top tier of teams in the East.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Does that make sense? So,
yeah, for sure. No, I know what you mean.
Yeah, so you have to put Tampa Bay above them. I think you have to put Toronto above them. I think, Rob, when it's all said and done, the Penguins could be the best team in the Metropolitan Division.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be shocked if they ended the year with a division championship under their belt and a little bit of a easier first round matchup, potentially home ice against the Capitals in the second round for once. That these are all potentials that exist that, put them in a position where they can avoid Tampa and Toronto, let the two of them sort of beat up on each other, and then maybe reap the benefit of it down the line somewhere. And that's assuming that Tampa, they have their own demons. I think in the modern era, making it to the Stanley Cup final or the Eastern Conference final against the Penguins, constantly being at or near the top of the pile and not being able to give her the hump, there's going to be pressure on them. But I kind of got the sense, Rob, that, and this is just based off one game, but thinking about that Penguins Lightning matchup last week, the Penguins forward group, and this was without McCann and Bjugstad, were really capable of overwhelming all three Lightning pairings, and that's terrifying to think about for Tampa, because that's really where they sold out, was defense.
Yeah,
and if the Penguins can neutralize that, and they've proven in the past that goaltending and good defense is just something they're immune to, then that's going to be a lot of trouble, I think, for them moving forward. So, again, the question is that engagement level, whether they can, I guess, quote unquote, flip the switch, and where their goaltending's at. But if they get that goaltending, and their special teams, especially on the power play side, can stop the shorthanded goals while continually being top 5 in the league, they can certainly do it.
Yeah, do you think that first round matchup is potentially key? I mean, they're 4 points behind the Islanders for the Metropolitan Division lead right now. I mean, even as an Islanders fan, I'm still wondering at what point maybe this great season kind of hits a little bit of a skid, because you look at the group and they've done fantastically well, but it's still not the marquee names that some of the other teams in the East have got. Do you think if that division lead is key right now, it would be probably Boston as the first wildcard spot? It could be Montreal, depending on how the Atlantic shakes out. But as you mentioned, like the home ice advantage you could get then as well in the second round. I mean, how significant of a factor could that be to a run to at least the Eastern Conference final, if not beyond?
Huge, I think. The Penguins in the series, going back and looking at their cup runs, there was always one series that they, you don't want to say made short work of, but they beat the Rangers in the first round, the first time they did it, and made pretty easy pickings of it. The next year they go to Columbus and beat up on the Blue Jackets in the first round in 5. So they've always sort of had that one series where they've been able to kind of get ahead of the game and rest up a minute and kind of get themselves collected as a postseason club, and I just think that's crucial. And I think that's why one of the ailments the Penguins had last year was taking Philadelphia for granted in the first round and having to play an extra game rather than having some time off to wait for Washington. They don't seal the deal. Now they've got to play this wild game 6 where you end up having to score 7 goals to pull it off. If they can exert their dominance and get something done and get in and out and be on their way, that goes a long way towards your longevity of playing all the way to June. Yeah.
Is there a I call it a bogey team, for lack of a better thought? You think Toronto, they don't want to play the Bruins, for example. Is there like a bogey team that the Penguins would prefer to avoid, do you think, certainly in the sort of the first round?
I don't think they'd want any part of the Maple Leafs in the first round. Now that's going to be hard to do because Toronto would have to win the division. That's not likely to happen. Yeah. But if by some miracle, what I think the Penguins would want to avoid, really any team that's going to make them skate a lot in the first series. So I think that in that sense, the Islanders are a pretty horrible matchup for them because they're just so disciplined defensively. And Barry Trotz, he's the guy that unlocked the key to beating the Penguins and beating Mike Sullivan. So there are certainly some demons there. But yeah, I think that I'd probably go with the Islanders and wanting to avoid any team that I think I think the Penguins in the first round against Tampa, there'd be so much pressure on the Lightning that it almost I think it'd flip the script. But yeah, that's my answer. New York.
It's interesting because the way obviously the matchups work out is Tampa. I think they're going to get the 1 seed, so they'll get the second wild card.
Yeah.
But there is still kind of the way it is, that chance that Pittsburgh could drop into there. I mean, Columbus are only 3 points behind them. The Blue Jackets have 1 extra game to play as well. Then the Blue Jackets are kind of hard to figure out right now because nobody knows what they do with Bobrovsky and Panarin. But it's such a weird setup. I tend to think Toronto will finish second in the Atlantic, but after that, things do seem wide open right now.
Yeah, and Columbus, I think, is suffering a little bit of the turmoil that this situation is creating. I think that the Penguins are somehow now directly involved in it because the trade that they made with Florida armed Florida with the ability to run at both those players.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody knows that. It's not a secret. And I think that, Columbus, I just wonder, you heard John Tortorella this week just go on one of his classic rampages in front of the media. And I don't know how fresh that message is anymore. I don't know if it's going to work with guys that are on their way out the door. And I think it's just the whole thing is kind of stale right now. So they have a significant set of decisions that they have to make. And are they buyers or sellers right now? They're in a little bit of a limbo, I think, in that sense too.
Yeah.
So it kind of puts them in a tough spot.
Did Carolina come into this at all? You'll have seen the Hurricanes a little bit this year with the divisional matchups. They're 3 points behind the Blue Jackets right now. They've been playing okay, 6-3-1 in the last 10. Do they kind of buck expectations? Because people thought they were kind of dead and buried a month or so ago, whereas now they're on the heels. Do they sneak in even?
Well, look, I mean, math, Rob. This is math in action. There's no way that they were going to shoot that poorly all year long.
Right? Yeah,
they're consistently among the and that's I give credit to I give credit to Rod Brindamore for just waiting it out, because you knew it was going to come. But the problem is that they've got ground to make up now.
Yeah.
So can they do it? Yes, but I think it requires Columbus, Washington, and Pittsburgh to continue to trip over themselves, which is what they're doing right now. It's going to require that in order for them to be able to kind of squeeze in there. But if they can keep winning at the clip they are and hope that Washington stays slumping or Columbus or Pittsburgh stays slumping, they'll be in good shape. But it's a little too reliant on external factors for my taste.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It just makes me curious because the way Columbus have been, as we said, not playing well. They've got this kind of cloud hanging over them. And like you said, the Canes' shooting percentage was low single figures for quite a while, which when you looked at their team was like, what?
Yeah. Well, you looked at the way that they created chances too. I mean, they should have been nowhere near where they were given how well they could create scoring chances.
But there they were, and now they're back. Maybe
there they were.
It's one of those things. But I mean, even just deviating slightly, the way the whole league has been, like the Flyers have won 7 straight. They're doing losing wrong because their season was sort of pretty much buried when even when they got rid of Hextall, the ground was really too significant in the modern NHL to make up, and 7 points out, it still probably is, but. In the West, I talked about the West on the last episode, how wild that's been. Nobody taking the ball and running with it. And although it's not the wild card race, as you alluded to, Washington, Pittsburgh just can't seem to put a timely streak together to pull away and set themselves in a good spot in the Metro.
Yeah, no, nobody wants to take control. Yeah, I mean, really, I think out of the top teams in the division, the Islanders have been the ones that are most consistent. Robin, I don't have to tell you that. They haven't exactly been the portrait of consistency, but they've been the better of all of those teams. So, again, Pittsburgh went on that massive run. But they kind of, Mike Sullivan would say that they got to a point where they're like, okay, we're in the division lead now, everything's fine. The panic was over of them not being in a wild card spot. Yeah. And then they kind of just turned it back off again, and he's been like, no, keep going. And we have to, so that's you'll never hear his name in the Jack Adams conversation, but I think you should, because he really, in a lot of ways is babysitting, this group of guys that, are so veteran and so experienced, but to constantly keep them engaged and the way he goes about it using video, I think it's a challenge for him that he always seems to excel at. So we'll see how it goes down the stretch run here, but they seem to be listening.
Awesome. Jesse, it's been great to speak to you today. Is there anything you want to promote, pimp out, tease? Where can people find you, etc. before we go? Yeah,
on Twitter at JMarshFOF, and on the Athletic Pittsburgh. We're going to do a little up. So I hesitate to promote this, Rob, because it's one of those things where trades can really derail what your plans are. But I think what we're going to do is check in on some good stuff that's happening within the system. As far as Ethan Prow and Wilkes-Barre Scranton, Philip Allender overseas, and kind of give you some updates on what's going on with them.
Awesome. Jesse, thank you very much for your time today.
Appreciate it.